23rd day, lower wind month, 1 CE. I thought I would be helping to keep unruly tribes in line, but this is. Boobibi lifted a box filled with documents, carrying it over to a tent next to the main pavilion. It probably wasn't the best use of a hero, but Florian figured it didn't hurt to familiarize Boobibi with the ideas and basic workings of the Sorceress Kingdom's administration. That being said, the Xian had a tremendous amount of difficulty absorbing anything at all. Florian wasn't sure if it was simply because everything that they were doing was simply alien to her race or whether it was something else. Back when we were fighting alongside the humans of the Holy Kingdom, Boobibi said as she re-entered the pavilion, their leaders used to take hours or days to decide on anything. Are these processes the reason why? I can't speak for the Holy Kingdom's leadership, Florian said, but this work is essential for the administration of human societies. Reporting must meet certain standards, be submitted promptly, and be carefully curated for effective decision-making and oversight at higher levels of management. The Xian hero folded and unfolded one of her long arms absently. Your lives seem very difficult. Much of what you do here, the Xian can discern by smell. By smell? Yes. Hunger, distress, fatigue, alarm, all these things possess an odor. If the tunnels aren't absorbing waste properly or if the humidity is too low or high, Xian who detect all of the aforementioned things will move to respond appropriately. There is a smell for everything, and we are born knowing those smells and what to do about them. I can't imagine how different our lives would be if humans could do that, Florian said, but this is what we have to work with. The Sorceress Kingdom is not populated solely by Xian, either. Our country needs systems that its member races can appreciate, understand, and put to use. Yet you mentioned that this was used for human societies? Florian set down the documents she was reviewing and looked over at Boobibi, who had taken a seat under a side table. As far as we're concerned, Florian said, His Majesty the Sorcerer King founded the Sorceress Kingdom in the Duchy of Eranthal, which is populated by humans. As such, it's what we've started with, but things won't stay as they are. We just need time to develop things properly. Lady Gonye, Isoroku said from the central table, a group of petitioners has arrived. Had she done anything that might attract petitioners? The last day or so consisted of her adding the information from the Xian to the office's library of knowledge. That information came with caveats, of course, but it was still valuable if only to develop an understanding of how the Xian saw the world around them. Perhaps the tribes noticed the Miku accompanying the supply convoys. If they sensed that change was coming that they could participate in, it was possible that they had decided to take initiative. She went over to the central table, placing a hand on the pile of updated racial dossiers. Which tribe is it? It is unknown whether the petitioners represent any particular tribe, Isoroku replied. Then who is it? A group of dwarf merchants. The Dark Dwarves? According to the Xian, two different races of dwarves were known to the locals. The Hill Dwarves were a race that lived in tribal groups much as the Orcs did, but they had not been seen in some time, so King BBZ speculated that they were no longer around. The second group were the same Dark Dwarves that the Orcs had mentioned, who showed up as wandering bands of merchants who traded equipment for slaves. I don't need this right now. Instead of some pleasantly positive development, it appeared that a new source of problems had arrived to add more complications. She was already buried in work and she had barely started on her tasks. Dealing with slave traders was so far down her list of priorities that it may as well have not existed. Florian closed her eyes and sighed, stepping away from the table. Did the local administration even have anything remotely resembling a hall? The main pavilion was effectively an office and it was hardly suitable for holding an audience. Where are they right now? She asked. They are being held beyond the second security perimeter, the army liaison answered. So far away? But why? The party was armed. Furthermore, they are allegedly participants in illegal activities. The appropriate customs procedures were enacted. She supposed that putting together what they knew about the Dark Dwarves did result in a stereotypically dangerous image. When she tried to picture them, the image of particularly short and violent thugs came to mind. Allegedly, so they haven't tried encouraging the pre-existing slave trade since the Sorceress Kingdom assumed the management of the area? Economic activity of the described nature has not been detected. At least there was that. She would have to deal with the Dark Dwarves at some point, but standing atop a pile of dead ones probably did her no favors. In that case, Florian said, let's prepare a place to receive them, just in case we need it. We'll keep it up for future audiences, as well. Clean out the tent over there and move it out to the first security perimeter. Keep the dwarves away from the cargo handling area, as well. Florian quickly penned something out on the blank sheet of paper lying on her desk, then held it out to Isoroku. Please contact Lady Albedo and deliver this message. The elder liches split up to carry out her instructions. Florian pulled out a hand mirror, frowning at what she discovered. Help me out, please, she said to the vampire bride. I'm a complete mess. Yes, Lady Gagne. Florian took 3 steps from the pavilion before Leolio alighted on her head with a flutter of his wings. She stopped in her tracks, exchanging a look with the vampire bride. Ah, that's why my hair looks like a bird's nest. I think Tier packed a hat, Florian said. It's so sunny and hot out here that I should have been wearing it anyway. It was still spring, yet it hadn't rained even once since she had arrived. After experiencing weeks of the Draconic Kingdom's rainy season, she felt like she was going to dry up and crumble into dust at any moment. Florian produced a wide-brimmed felt hat decorated with woven flowers on its band, and, after combing out her hair and fixing up her dress, the vampire bride placed it lightly on her head. Leolio hopped back on. Florian could feel him testing the material with his talons. Don't ruin my hat, please, Florian said. It's the only one I brought with me. Ah, Vubibi, could you wait here, please? Of course. The natural weapons and armor of the Zirn precluded the use of equipment. As such, they were almost guaranteed to harvest any dwarves that appeared for consumption. Given the personalities of the dwarves that she was familiar with, it was probably best to keep anything that they might consider an enemy out of sight. Florian mounted her solitaire and rode past the first security perimeter, which was the rim of the shallow crater within which the regional administrative office was raised. The second security perimeter was 2 kilometers further, and it was there that she found their petitioners. They had the stout and solid figures characteristic of the Azalesian mountain dwarves, but these dwarves were all bald. A mix of grey and white beards graced their faces, which were also covered in dark tattoos. Their dark grey skin and dour looks gave off an atmosphere absent of any warmth or humor. As she grew close, one of the dwarves gestured toward her with a shake of his beard. Another dwarf rose from where they were squatting inside a circle of death knights, turning to face her. Florian dismounted several meters away and walked over to greet them with a pleasant smile. Good evening. I am Florian Cadia Dale Gagne, a baroness of the Sorceress Kingdom. To what do I owe the pleasure of your acquaintance? Name's Falagrim, the dark dwarf standing before her said. Your associates here are interfering with my business. And what might that business be? That'd be none of your business. The Abelian Wilderness is under the jurisdiction of the Sorceress Kingdom's administration, Master Falagrim, Florian told him. Any business that you conduct while you are here is my business. The dark dwarf gave her a hard look. Florian held his gaze for a dozen heartbeats before he harumphed. What happened to all those fiends that were running the place before? He asked. They were defeated by a coalition of liberated tribes led by His Majesty the Sorcerer King, Florian answered. Those tribes have, in turn, willingly submitted to the Sorcerer King's rule. That so? Falagrim said, in that case, who do I see to obtain a merchant's license here? Membership with the Merchant Guild is usually enough, Florian said. However, the problem here is that the accounts of the local tribes mark you as slave traders. So what? Slavery is illegal in the Sorceress Kingdom. Falagrim's face screwed up into an expression halfway between confusion and disgust. That's crazy, he said. That's the law, Florian replied. Slavery is practiced everywhere. Not in the Sorceress Kingdom, it isn't, Florian told him. There are other, better forms of trade that are practiced everywhere. For instance, your gold is just as good here as anyone else's. The dark dwarf's features settled into an unreadable look. I'll go and confer with my merchants, he said. We're free to go, yeah? We haven't broken any of your laws unless you plan on retroactively charging us for something that happened before you even showed up. If that's the case, you'll be prosecuting the entire population of the Abelian Hills. You and your people are free to go, Florian's smile returned. We look forward to doing business with you. So, what are we putting together, boss? A bit of everything, Falagrim said. Kind of like with the orcs, but more prissy. He spat into the campfire. The things that he had to put up with. What race are we dealing with? One of his merchants asked. Humans, I guess, Falagrim answered. What the hell are humans doing out here? And what do you mean by I guess? She's got a bunch of undead with her. The merchants across the campfire stared up at him. A necromancer? One of them asked. Maybe she'll fancy equipping her minions. Who knows? Falagrim rose to his feet. She claims to be a human noble and she dresses the same crazy way as the histories tell. You gotta give us more than that to work with. She's got a fucking bird on her head, Falagrim shouted at them. Work with that. The merchants turned to walk away, speaking in low voices between themselves. Falagrim kicked a twig into the fire, then moved 3 steps to take a seat again on a boulder nearby. Did she really have a bird on her head? Agni asked. I swear by all the gods she did, Falagrim answered. Not some mock-up, but a real god's damned bird. Decadent, lazy, and insufferably imperious. Possessed of all the reckless impulsiveness of a short-lived race and just about as ugly as an elf. It looked like the old accounts about humans weren't all too far off at the mark. A few minutes later, the caravan workers started coming by, dropping off bits and pieces of merchandise. Most of what they had was unenchanted and fashioned for the races of Yaldabaoth's army, so what they had to display to the human was limited to magical equipment and weapons that could be wielded by their skinny hands. At least summon undead in the shape of our old customers, damn it. While the litter was being loaded, one of the grey robes came up to speak with him. Shall we accompany you this time, my prince? What are you scheming? It's a new customer, the grey robe shrugged. Potentially. We should find out as much as we can, and our merchants only have an eye for merchandise and trade. I should come with them, as well, Agni said. Who knows what mischief this necromancer is up to? Falagrim considered the risks of taking their company's sole cleric with them. Her insight would undoubtedly be useful when it came to the undead. Just don't do anything that might get us in trouble, he said. That girl's got 3 elder liches and a bunch of other nasties with her. Elder liches? Agni frowned. Are you sure? I'm sure unless you can think of anything else that looks like an elder lich. Why? She would have to be an extraordinarily powerful necromancer to dominate 3 elder liches. Even if she could, it's a stupid idea. Why's that? Elder liches aren't summons, Agni told him. They grow in power over time as they pursue their studies and absorb the mana around them. Eventually, they'll grow beyond the limit of their dominator's control and turn on them. Falagrim grunted. It'd be a fine sight to watch her dance when they light her ridiculous costume on fire, bird and all. It isn't happening right now, though, so don't stir anything up. An hour later, Falagrim returned to the undead checkpoint on the trail to the Dale of Defiance. Instead of going up to speak with the human noble himself, he sent the merchants in. Trying to power through another race's rubbish laws as a dwarf lord was too difficult, so he figured he'd let the merchants have a go with their own ways. He stood back at the edge of his dark vision range with Agni and the grey robes, waiting to see if the merchants could produce any results. The human noble greeted the 3 merchants with her stupid smile and the stupid bird on her head. That's her, then? Agni asked. In the flesh, Falagrim crossed his arms. The pasty one behind her shoulder is a handmaiden, I guess. Asking for a steel quarrel between those udders of hers, if you ask me. Prancing around the Abelian hills in a strip of cloth was bound to get one killed, eventually. Agni gave him a look. That's a vampire, my prince. Whatever. One more undead didn't matter. He turned his attention to the grey robes standing to his left. Get anything? We're still making our preparations, my prince. What about you, Law? It's mixed, the Deep Warden replied. Falagrim frowned. Mixed? Something's off, maybe. She's both weaker and stronger than she seems. You better start making some damn sense. Law came closer, speaking in a low voice. She comes off as stronger than the caravan workers, at first glance, but her movements mark her as a civilian or at least someone who isn't used to danger. There's no sign of martial training. At the same time, look at how she's handling that suit of mail. It may as well be a napkin to her. The enchanted adamantite hauberk glimmered in the moonlight as the human inspected it. Falagrim ground his teeth. He didn't like it when things didn't stack up. "The probe isn't getting through," a grey cloak reported. "We're being blocked." Falagrim cursed under his breath. As extravagantly foolish as she looked, the human had come fully prepared to deal with dark dwarves. "Could it be that she's not a human at all?" Agni muttered. "Eh? What are you on about now?" Before the gates of Harda were sealed, the cleric told him, there were rumors of mortals who had discovered the secret to lichdom. "She doesn't look like a damn lich to me." "They were rumored to be extraordinarily vain," Agni said, clinging to the trappings of their mortal existence even after they left it behind. The use of a title and her mortal appearance could be seen as evidence of that. "I didn't consider it at first since she wasn't giving off an undead reaction, but if she's being shielded by a non-detection effect or something similar, it would make more sense as to how she's controlling all of these powerful undead, at least." The gates of Harda had been closed with the fall of the Archelian Empire, so he couldn't imagine how strong such a being might have gotten after so long. It at least gave credence to the existence of a sorceress kingdom being run by necromancers controlling powerful undead. That didn't help Falagrim's current situation in the slightest, however. 15 minutes passed and, still, the negotiations dragged on. Eventually, the three merchants returned to Falagrim. The one in the center tossed a pouch over. It hit Falagrim's hand with a metallic clink. "It's no good, boss," he said. "We couldn't get better than a fair price." "No," the one to his left grumbled, "it's more like she let us get away with a fair price." Falagrim curled his lip. "She? You mean the vampire there with her? Don't tell me she charmed you." "That was a vampire?" "Answer the question." "It was the one with the bird on her head," the merchant told him. "We couldn't get her to budge on the price. She wasn't in any rush to get rid of us, either. The longer we tried to haggle, the more information she pulled out of us. We cut loose as soon as we noticed." He looked at the stars overhead, taking a deep breath. "How long have you been working for me?" "Nearly a century, boss." "So you're saying that you've been working as a merchant for a century and this human got the better of you?" "She's not even a merchant, she's just a damn noble." "No, I'm sure she's a merchant. There's no way she isn't one." The merchant looked to the two others, who nodded in agreement. "Great," Falagrim said. "So this human noble is a necromancer, a lich, and a merchant, too? What else do you want to add to that?" "I didn't say that she was a lich, boss." "I think you've been preying on these damned tribals for so long that you've forgotten how to haggle." Falagrim opened the pouch and scowled at the contents. "What the hell am I supposed to do with these coins, even?" "We told her we needed provisions like you told us to," the merchant replied. "She needs some time to get everything together, so she left the money with us." "She's headed this way, boss," Law said. They fell silent as the human noble, or whatever she was, came over with the vampire at her side. She stopped 10 meters away. "What do you want?" Falagrim called out to her. "May I join you and your associates, Master Falagrim?" she asked. He motioned her over with a jerk of his head. "I heard from these gentlemen that you required provisions for a foray into Avasha," she said. "I thought I'd warn you that, even if you successfully conduct your business in the south, any shipments of slaves will still be turned away at the border." "Ridiculous," Falagrim spat. "We're going out of our way to observe your damn laws. Now you're trying to deny us our livelihoods? Even if your transactions take place outside of the Sorceress Kingdom's borders, slavery is still illegal in our country, and that of course means slaves are considered contraband. Won't you consider other ways to conduct trade? Going by the goods that your merchants had on display, the craft of your people would be highly valued in the markets of our nation and those of our allies. We only trade in slaves, girl. For menial labor, yes? You may be interested to know that the Sorceress Kingdom leases undead for that very purpose. They have many benefits over living labor, including, they don't tire." Falagrim rolled his eyes. "They don't get sick, don't get bored or complain. You can have them work in places that present risks to the living, and they're easily replaceable. Did I miss anything?" "I believe you have the gist of it, Master Falagrim." "Yeah, well, I wasn't born yesterday," he said. "You're not the first to make the offer, nor will you be the last. Our answer will always be the same, not interested." Admittedly, it had been a long time since anyone had done so, but the points that they brought up never changed. Any civilization worth calling a civilization that was interested in employing undead labor would create its own undead, not rely on others for them. I must say that this is the first time that anyone has answered in such a way, the human said. Might I know the reason for your refusal? Because they belong to someone else, Falagrim told her. I don't know about you, but I think the idea of leasing countless undead that could be turned against their employer at any given moment seems like a terminally stupid idea. Beyond that, a slave was far superior to any undead laborer. Slaves were alive. They could scream, cry, suffer and die. Undead just did their thing until they fell apart, which wasn't satisfying at all. The girl didn't seem to have anything to say to that, so Falagrim excused himself and returned with his people to their camp. Agony came out to where he stood atop the riverbank, staring out at the Abelian River. Now what? Agony said. I'm thinking, Falagrim replied absently. Was there anywhere else they could go? His first thought was to try his luck in the Holy Kingdom of Roble, but since the Sorceress Kingdom had gotten rid of Yaldabaoth and his minions, it was likely that they held some sway there. Furthermore, while a war-torn country might be a good place to pick up slaves, he probably wouldn't be able to unload his goods there. That was ultimately his problem. Wherever he ended up, he had to find a market for goods fashioned for the various races of the Abelian Hills. The only alternative markets that he knew of were in Avasha and a few places even further abroad. Could I head to Roble and hire a ship? They should have southbound routes. Things were getting too convoluted and the expenses kept piling up. His suppliers only accepted slaves, the Sorceress Kingdom didn't allow slave trading, and he was stuck in the middle. Maybe this is a good opportunity to... No, he cut Agni off. What other options do we have? She said. The Sorceress Kingdom's closed down our market and we can't even bring slaves through their territory even if we do find new ones. At least what I spoke about will keep us going. It won't keep our clan going, Falagrim said. Then make a new home for us. How many centuries will this go on for? You know that the other princes won't ever let you return home. And they won't ever let us leave, either, Falagrim replied. You know how it works. Exile wouldn't mean much if you could just resettle somewhere else on a whim, and like hell I'd just abandon the hearth of our ancestors for something so trivial as inconvenience. I never said we'd do that, Agony told him. It can be someplace where we can build up our strength. The other clans have no idea what we're doing out here or where we go. We could have a whole other kingdom and they wouldn't notice until we came back to knock on their door. Falagrim continued staring out the river. The appearance of the Sorceress Kingdom and its potential as a trade partner had rekindled an aspiration in his sister-in-law that had long lay dead. The last time she had been so assertive was back when she had first joined the trade caravans, where she somehow saw opportunities to gain power around every corner. You're forgetting whom you're pinning your aspirations on, Falagrim told her. Humans. And a human can't be trusted any more than a goblin. Lady Albedo has replied to your correspondence. Florine eased her Soul Eater to a halt. She looked over her shoulder to stare into the night. The dark dwarves had long parted ways with her, and she was already on her way back to the local administration's central office. What did she say? Florine asked. In response, Isoroku held out a sheet of parchment. In contrast to Lady Shultier's elegant, flowing cursive, Lady Albedo's handwriting was concise and economical. Florine's eyes scanned the page, wondering whether the timing was good or bad. Investigate their industrial and economic potential, but prioritize your work in the administrative area. Immediately report any significant military risks. Did our army liaison note any significant military risks? Florine asked. Define significant, Isoroku answered. Enough to hamper domestic activities? Unknown. Reports from the liaison often include caveats noting tribal tendencies to conduct asymmetrical warfare. Incorporating the MIQ into the area's patrols will potentially mitigate the effect of the types of strategies that the region's tribal populations tend to employ, but it is thus far speculation. We lack the data to arrive at any decisive conclusions. Are you saying that potential risks are present? Potentially. The tentatively structured response would have been unthinkable for any of the elder lichers a year ago. Over that time, the administration was made to realize that the world didn't work in the neat and tidy way that they believed it should. While some people desired unwavering confidence from those they considered experts, Florian thought the shift in Isaraku's attitude was a positive thing. "How about the Dark Dwarves?" Florian asked. "Were they strong enough to cause trouble?" "Any conjectures made concerning the individuals in question come with a low degree of confidence," Isaraku said. "Based on their interaction with you, our initial assessment is that their level of development falls under Type A human." "Does that mean the Abelian wilderness follows Type A tribal?" "No. Observations thus far indicate that 80% of the population may be categorized under Type A tribal, while the remainder fit under Type B tribal. That should explain much of what's presented in the materials." Indeed. Over the winter, the Sorceress Kingdom's analysis of the nearby region had grown exhaustive enough for them to begin categorizing the different societies that lay within it. Of course, the categories were as much threat assessments as they were measures of a civilization's progress. Type A human was what the humans of the region considered normal. It was a civilization where all but the chosen few lived mundane lives in nearly every sense of the word. Job classes saw minimal development, skills and abilities were wrapped up in superstition and tradition. Institutions were considered rudimentary and the result of mundane practical realities. Riastais, Baharuth and Roble were all considered countries that followed Type A human. The Empire would have probably protested being lumped into the same category as their longtime rival had they known about it, but, to the Sorceress Kingdom, there was little difference between them. What the Empire considered its leading-edge institutions were all exclusive and the common citizen of the Empire was essentially the same as the common citizen of Riastais, making their industrial and economic base fundamentally the same. The Draconic Kingdom was one of the two countries thus far that fell into the Type B human category. Due to their situation, they didn't have significant martial or magical development, but the institutions of their country incorporated the entirety of its citizenry. Those institutions incorporated methods that displayed a strong, if indirect, understanding of the job class system and how to game it, which was evident in the way that they were able to power through their recovery. The other country that fell into Type B human was that of the Wyvern Rider tribes, and they had gone in an entirely different direction with it. The kingdom of the Azalisian mountain dwarves was also a candidate, though it was yet to be seen how much they could reclaim of their former glory. There was also a Type C human, but it hadn't been applied to any country. The only place that sported the label was Warden's Vale, and Leanne continued to assert that Ludmilla was a cheater. Florian wouldn't call it cheating, but she knew where her friend was coming from. There were still less than 2,000 citizens in Warden's Vale. They were buried in resources, and their liege was keenly aware of the relation between culture, institutions, and job class development. The weirdly on-the-mark dogma of the Faith of the Six also gave her people an undeniable edge. Meanwhile, everyone else had their hands full incorporating the Sorceress Kingdom's new systems, had tens of thousands of people packed into their limited land, and were still a long way from shedding the baggage that the people had brought with them from Riastais' common culture. The demi-human tribes of the region had a different set of categorizations, and, though they used the same, rough nomenclature as the human societal categories, each was something of a diagonal step to the side. This was owing to the fact that demi-humans could get by purely through being demi-humans, while humans built societies of specialists from the outset. Type A tribal could be found all along the fringes of Riastais and Baharuth. As such, they were the demi-humans that everyone tended to think of, primitive, disorganized, and the staple diet of the common adventurer. Due to their lack of sophistication, they were considered brutes by their human neighbors, though Florian found their simplicity a pleasant thing when she was dealing with them. Type B tribal was not quite analogous to Type A human. Demi-human societies of this type formed rudimentary polities, though they could be quite expansive. Their mystic traditions became formalized as nascent institutions, and caste structures appeared as they discovered job class specializations. The influence of trade also grew, and they became more connected with their neighbors, often by way of violent relationships. The frost giants of the Azalisia Mountains were the first society of this type that the Sorceress Kingdom encountered, though, considering where they had come from, the goblin army that invaded the upper reaches was probably the actual first. Ludmilla asserted that the gnolls of the Blister were also a part of the category, but they had been wiped out by the Empire. The Beastmen of Rolengork were the most recent group that they had encountered in the numbers they could muster against their enemies beggared belief. Now that she was working in the Abelian wilderness, however, Florian's concerns didn't revolve around any form of warfare, but around the practical realities that gave rise to the various type A and B tribal societies that could be found in the abelian wilderness. The notion that so many different peoples fit into these broad categorizations, or, rather, the fact that the categorizations were the result of studying so many different societies, lent to the notion that there were commonalities that put them all on the same general path. Her task was to identify those commonalities and how they interacted with one another to act as foundational and transformative elements of society. Through that understanding, she needed to create protocols that the denizens of the abelian wilderness could all adopt. The product of the protocols was otherwise known as culture, and the different cultures that resulted from their implementation needed to be conducive to achieving the policy goals of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. It was the same thing that Ludmilla was doing in her domain, but Florine had to do it on the country-sized scale. How many decades would it take? No, it's something that has to be managed indefinitely. The world changed, so culture had to change along with it. For the time being, she needed to come up with some basic ideas and see how they worked out. Lady Albedo may have not given her a deadline for the project, but it didn't mean that no results were expected along the way. Florine's lips turned down at the thought of the Prime Minister. Her assignment was characteristic of the way that Lady Albedo operated. As with most of the Sorcerer King's inner circle, class levels factored heavily into her perception, judgment, and decision-making. Their faith in that system was no less certain than that of a common farmer's faith that the sun would come up every morning. In her governance of the Sorcerer's Kingdom, Lady Albedo applied the system to every aspect of the realm. Unlike many an authority figure who might get it into their heads that they could improve upon things by sticking their noses into the business of those working for them, the Prime Minister was confident that every individual would act according to their role, which was defined by their job classes. She assigned the individuals of her choosing to a variety of tasks, using them to generate data and innovate new processes that she could evaluate and implement in other areas. The fly in the ointment when it came to this approach was that the vast majority of individuals in the region were only harnessing a fraction of what their job classes made them capable of. Furthermore, Lady Albedo speculated that over 99% of the population was no higher than level 5. This put the royal court of the Sorcerer's Kingdom in the surprisingly normal situation of being starved for talent. As they were wary of spreading the knowledge of job class levels, their pool of capable agents consisted of those already considered the greatest experts in their fields and those with a working knowledge of the job class system. The former were extraordinarily rare and courted by every nation that knew of them. The latter were rarer still, consisting of those who were made aware of the system in the early days of the Sorcerer's Kingdom and the chosen few who were allowed to gain that knowledge after it was suppressed for security reasons. Florine was a member of the latter, and her selection for the work in the abelian wilderness was predicated on her role as a noble and the idea that nobles possessed a certain set of capabilities. Many of those things had been formalized by the aristocratic establishment and how it educated its scions. Leadership, territorial management, economic acumen, legal expertise, diplomacy, accounting, language skills, and an appreciation for the arts were all part of being a noble, though some nobles cared more for some things than others, or didn't care for them at all, in a few cases. She had been able to extend those things to the management of demi-humans to a rudimentary degree, yet that rudimentary degree was still far in advance of the other members of the civilian aristocracy. Additionally, she was a baroness with a small, highly developed territory, and that gave her a lot of free time. A part of her suspected that the reason why she hadn't been granted more land and promoted was so that the royal court could keep her busy with tasks outside of her territory. Boobibi looked like she was practicing outside when Florine and her escort returned to the administrative office. They watched her strange, undulating movements for a time before she stopped and turned to bob her head towards Florine. "Welcome back," the Xian hero said. "Did anything interesting happen?" "It depends on what one considers interesting." Florine dismounted from her solita. "If I recall correctly, the Xian aren't much for trade, are they?" "The Xian have no need for it," Boobibi replied. "Other races appear to have an appreciation for trade, however. There are many benefits to trade beyond the exchange of goods and services," Florine said. "For instance, it is a major source of news, information, and ideas in most places. One can gain much from what others have to share." "Is that not what travelers are for?" Boobibi asked. "Do the Xian have travelers?" "Not that I know of. We Xian do not stray far from our homes unless necessary. Usually, It is to wage war, preemptively curbing a developing threat. Travelers are known amongst the other races, however. She wasn't sure whether she wanted to know how the Xian knew about that, but the notion that the tribes of the Abelian Hills had travelers presented an interesting avenue to explore. It was a pseudo-institution that many tribal societies recognized and one that she could potentially exploit to expedite the exchange of ideas in the special administrative area. In that case, Florine said, where do you see your people in the future? Do you plan on staying in the Thousand Sinkholes forever, isolated from the world? It would be nice if it were possible, Bubibi said. I have mostly lived that way for the last 150 years. You're 150 years old? I am. Bubibi twisted her long head slightly. If the peace that your sorcerer king promises holds, then it is likely that I will live for far longer. How long do the Xian live for? Florine asked. That is unknown, the Xian hero answered. The oldest was our former king. He lived for many centuries before being killed by Yaldabaoth. Though we can be long-lived, the continual need to defend our territory sees most dead before a century has passed. Even a hero such as myself would eventually meet their end at the hands of another hero or some other powerful being. That is simply the way of things. The Xian dossier listed them as an insectoid demi-human species, but demi-humans usually didn't live for long. Frost giants were the longest-lived that she knew of. Florine returned to the main pavilion, taking a seat at her desk to record the information that she had gained from the Dark Dwarf merchants. Isoroku's assessment of the Dark Dwarves as a Type A human civilization was supported by the fact that she had commanded her negotiations with them from start to finish. They were all over a century old, but age only meant one had the time to accrue job class levels. It was not a guarantee, and their time dealing with the relatively primitive demi-human tribes of the Abelian wilderness meant that their development as merchants was slow compared to those who operated in a more competitive environment. That being said, there were a few things that were too difficult to coax out of them. The location of their home was one of them, as was any information that might make their home vulnerable. Possibly the most interesting tidbit was that Felagrim, the caravan master, was actually an exiled prince. This is going to affect my writing, isn't it? Florine sighed. Apologies, Lady Gagne, the vampire bride said. This one does not understand your question. I was just talking to myself. She had planned on adding an exotic exiled prince as a character in Dreams of Red. He was supposed to be a darkly handsome fellow that tickled the fancy of those who might want to nurse his emotional wounds and bring joy back into his life. Now, she could only think of Lord Grumpy of the Grump Dwarves. Exile might be an embittering experience, but there was no point in letting it dominate one's outlook and personality. Their grumpiness aside, Dark Dwarves were distinctly different from their mountain dwarf relatives. While they had full beards, they had no hair on their heads. Their skin tone ranged from ashen grey to a bluish black. They had a small pantheon of gods, and work appeared to be the only thing that they valued. The last point might have explained their fixation on trading in slaves and a part of their refusal to consider undead labor. Employing the undead might be considered cheating in a sense, adding another layer of aversion to the usual reasons the living abhorred the undead. Florine spent the next hour recording the information and reviewing it before submitting her report. The adamant refusal to accept the Sorceress Kingdom's initial overtures was a default expectation at this point, so the news of their refusal would be seen as business as usual. What next? How are the Maiku accompanying the convoys doing? Florine asked. The consensus amongst the servitors is noisy, Isoroku answered. Is that a problem? Assuming that they are functioning as intended, no. Have the tribes asked any questions about them? No. Have there been any developments at all while I was away? No. She rose from her desk, walking over to look at the map on the central table. Her next excursion would take her northwest along the Abelian River, visiting the few tribes that they had passed on the way to the Orcs. Florine had no idea what the Dark Dwarves were going to do, but she would be close enough that she could return within an hour should her presence be required. In that case, Florine said, let's get ready for our next trip. Before dawn the next morning, they accompanied another convoy up the river. Florine reviewed the information she had with the upcoming tribe. Yeoi? How do you even pronounce that? The dossier said that they were a race of Ziriani beastmen. Florine wondered how closely they resembled the ground squirrels that could be found all over Riastais and Baharuth. Like all beastmen, They were obligate carnivores and historically waged war with all of the tribes around them. She couldn't quite imagine a tribe of ground squirrels doing that. As she had with the Maiku, Florine stayed behind with the shipment of beastman corpses left on the riverbank. She sent Isoroku, Fubibi, and the infantry squad away, leaving herself, the vampire bride and Leolio, who seemed to have made himself at home on her hat. The minutes passed with nothing but the sound of the wind in the river accompanying them. Pip. Florine scanned the brush along the riverbank, but she didn't notice anything. Pip. What do you see, Leolio? 60 sets of hungry eyes, staring from the leaves, Pip. At least he was using his wary call. She wasn't sure how many attackers the vampire bride and her shadow demon could handle at once, but 60 seemed like a bit much. A few minutes later, however, Leolio's calls escalated by 1 degree. Many more come, the Maiku said. She still couldn't see any of them. Did we do something? Florine said, we're just standing here, aren't we? Leolio's calls de-escalated as Bubibi came from across the river to join them. This is dangerous, she said. The Yeoi are the type to grow bolder as their numbers increase. Is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure if I can make that sound. But we're not doing anything to warrant aggression, Florine said. Merely standing here warrants aggression, Bubibi told her. I understand that you are not a warrior, but, from your behavior, I can also see that humans are a race whose instincts are dulled. I thought it might be the case in the Holy Kingdom, but the ones I saw there were more sensitive to danger due to their situation. Was the situation Florine was in that dangerous? She couldn't sense a thing. If anything, it was a bright and pleasant morning. I still don't understand why they're becoming aggressive, she said. Because that is the way they are, Bubibi said. In your terms, some races are more reasonable than others. To the races that you may consider unreasonable, you are the one being unreasonable. What is acceptable and unacceptable varies from race to race. But there must be a way to come to a mutual understanding. Perhaps, Bubibi said. Yaldabaoth took the most aggressive races with him on his invasion of the Holy Kingdom. None of them returned. If a non-aggressive race is being aggressive toward me for just standing here, what were the aggressive races like? Leolio's cries rose by 1 notch again. What do we do? Florine asked. You may escalate, Bubibi said, or you may withdraw. I just want to talk, Florine pouted. She looked out at the riverbank supposedly teeming with unseen demi-humans. I just want to talk. I'm not here to fight. Florine's words received no reply. Leolio's cries continued. Neither escalating nor withdrawing were desirable options, but withdrawing was the worse of the two. An official of the Sorceress Kingdom couldn't be driven away by anyone in their own territory, be they brigands, uncooperative visitors, or aggressive demi-human tribes. Isoroku, come out and join me. Bring everyone there with you. Her undead adjutant and escort rejoined her. And Leolio's calls de-escalated again. Would the Yeoi gather more? There probably weren't enough of them to stand a chance against a full infantry squad, assuming that they were being rational about their chances. The way that Bubibi described them felt that it wouldn't be the case. My name is Florine Cadia Dale Gonye, she called out to the foliage along the riverbank. A baroness of the Sorceress Kingdom. I've been assigned to assist in the administration of the Abelian Hills. A few moments later, one of the Yeoi slinked out of the bushes. To Florine's surprise, its appearance matched the one in the dossier. It looked like a 1.5 meter long ground squirrel with 3 black stripes and 2 white ones running down its back and up its tail. Except, it's so cute, oh my goodness, why does it have so many teeth? The Yeoi stopped several meters in front of her. In its otherwise cute-looking face was a mouth filled with 3 rows of long, pointy fangs. Florine did her best not to recoil in fright, returning its toothy expression of unknown meaning with a calm smile. The Sorcerer King sent you to rule over us? No, I'm just here to assist in the administration of the territory. The Yeoi stared across at her wordlessly. It occurred to Florine that their society may not have any concept of an administration in the bureaucratic sense that human countries perceived it. The closest thing in their tribal society to administering would be something like ruling. This isn't the correct term, she said, but you might consider me something like an elder that helps to lead the tribe. Except, in my case, I'm helping with the entire region. She stood there silently as the demi-human looked her up and down. You do not seem very experienced, it said, but you are wearing bright colors. Are you a mystic? Would you believe me if I said that I was a lord? No. It was an immediate reply that left no room for interpretation. I thought not, Florian sighed. Anyway, whether you believe that I'm a lord or not doesn't change the fact that I'm here to help everyone become accustomed to their new lives as citizens of the Sorceress Kingdom. To do that, I need to get to know your people better. What does the elder need to know? The Yoi asked. It will be a long discussion, Florian answered. Perhaps we could speak in your village. The Yoi regarded Florian with its gleaming black eyes, then sent a pointed look at the long row of beastman corpses behind her. Iliki will do this, the demi-human said. But, first, might her people take their food? They grow more ravenous by the moment. Of course, Florian smiled. Please don't hold back on our account. I look forward to getting to know you and your people. She cringed as Iliki let out a high-pitched squeal. The bushes along the riverbank seemed to come alive as hundreds of her tribespeople emerged and came forward. Florian gestured for the undead to make way. Groups of 6 Yoi each picked up a beastman between them, carrying the corpses back the way that they came. Others came forward with skulls in their hands, making a great pile before her. I hope they're not meant for me. It was a scene that was both cute and terrifying at the same time. A ridiculous part of Florian imagined her sitting on a throne made of their grim offerings. Leolio was still sitting on her head, too. Once the last of her tribe was away, Iliki turned to Florian. Come, she said. I will bring you to our new home.